Okay, there we go.
All right.
Now we're recording.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
We'll get there. Really, we know what we're doing.
As if we haven't been teaching on Zoom.
Well, I am just off sabbatical, so I've forgotten how to do all of this.
Right.
And putting together a lightning talk was a really fun way for me to reflect on some of the cool things I did on a pandemic sabbatical, which was a little different than what I held in my head when I started as an assistant professor in 2013 of going on sabbatical. So I'm just going to give a quick lightning storm through some of the studies linking vegetation and water quality and water quantity that I have started or been a part of while I've been on sabbatical. And all of the photographs, I have to give a shout out. My husband convinced me to buy a cabin in Cook County, Minnesota, and this is what sunset looks like off our dock. So I spent a bunch of time there too. Oh Lord, there we go. So I want to think about, I've been thinking a lot about looking at landscapes and looking at the relationship between vegetation and water from really different perspectives. So it's really interesting to think about flying over landscapes in the Midwest, and you can see these really kind of dendritic patterns of trees. And my mind always understands that there's usually a stream channel or a river channel in them. And so what you get when you're standing in that river bottom, you feel like you're in the forest, but really that forest isn't very wide and very expansive. And what we see coming down the river, both like optically with our eyes, chemically, we put tracers in into these streams and rivers, is that that river really serves as an embodiment of the amount and quality of the entire landscape in multiple dimensions. And so this was a set of tracer experiments where we actually release dye tracers that have different chemical properties into the stream. So in my lab, we turned streams pink. I wore matching pants for that today. And we like to think about using these to help us understand how material moves downstream. And so that's Ethan Pulowski, who defended his doctoral dissertation last Friday morning and is moving on to a great postdoc position with the ARS down in Oxford, Mississippi. However, sometimes the water outflows doesn't look quite as organized into a channel. And so this is another site in northern Minnesota where we're dealing with an exclosure because there's some contamination inside of it. And so what we're doing is looking at the whole kind of watershed in 3 dimensions. And so this involves sampling a lot of soil, thinking about plants, as well as thinking about the water flowing out of these exclosures. And in this case, we're looking for chronic wasting disease and to see if chronic wasting disease has an environmental waterborne vector that we need to consider in addition to the animal populations. However, other times we're working in urban systems now. And so even from above, we can see that this area, which is in the Highland Park neighborhood of St. Paul, still has a lot of vegetation in it when we're looking overhead. And at this point, we're also trying to reframe some of these studies down to those individual tree scales to think about how are the water fluxes interacting with what's flowing down the tree, through the tree, back up to the atmosphere through the tree, how the tree itself can contribute to nutrients and other water quality concerns. And so this is work, my most local field site ever was installed over sabbatical in my front yard. And so we're looking at these on many, many, many different scales. So sabbatical was great for being able to do field work, even in a pandemic where it was all in driving distance. So thank you. Is anyone timing?
I realized after the fact, so I don't know the timing. But we're going to hold questions till the end, and we're just going to go through the whole lightning setup. Sonja, I think you are next.
I myself too.
We'll get you to the start of your slideshow.
All right. Introduce yourself.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah. I'm Sonja Tosteson. I'm the new volunteer and partnerships coordinator with the U4 lab in the Department of Forestry. Started at the end of May, so I haven't met a lot of you, but I'm really excited to be here. I'm here to talk a little bit about one of our main parts of the lab. We do our tree care advocate program. Anybody here heard of it? Yes, no, that's why I'm here. So these, I won't go into huge detail, but here are a select number of people in our lab, and as well as some interns and arborists and a couple of our important funders. Woohoo! So you can find out more about us online or just chat with us anytime. So the Tree Care Advocate Program is a program throughout the state of Minnesota, and it is comprised of two main programs that really are all about getting people in the communities to interact with one another and to help trees. They're primarily in city environments, although town versus city versus big, that's a little bit. They're in rural Minnesota. We have programs in Morris and Ely and St. Paul, so they're all throughout the state, and they come together just to make high quality of life. And we all know and are in the Department of Forest Resources how much we value trees. So there are two main programs, and these are both volunteer-led and primarily adults. We do have some kids that come here and there too as well. Tree care advisors. So those are more independent-based folks. We have them all throughout the state in many, many different counties and zip codes. They do an intensive training. So if you've heard of Master Gardener training, it's a similar intensive at the beginning, and then they have a number of hours they have to do each year following for both volunteering and for education to keep up on the latest science and volunteer practices. Then we have our tree stewards, which are community-based groups. So those are groups like in the city of St. Paul, or we're doing a training in Legatzke next week. And those are usually a city person who works with a cohort of volunteers to do a lot of on-the-ground work that is essential, but really frees up, city arborists to do things other than pruning for sightlines. So keeping those trees watered after they're planted, because maintenance is huge. Making sure that stop signs, have good sight lines, so kids riding their bicycles, pruning, answering questions from, folks at tree plantings and things like that. And that is really a cool program because each city is different, so they can tailor it to their specific needs. It's not like we say, oh, you got to do 3 plantings a year and 10 hours of homework. I don't know. They can really make those planting events, or they can make them maintenance events or group events, and things like that. So we have a ton of other stuff happening too that is alongside and overlaps with our Tree Care Advocate program. For example, our Tree Essentials workshops are right down here. On the lab on the St. Paul campus. So we've had 6 or 7 this year. They can be for tree planting and basic pruning. They can be maintenance. They can be abiotic and biotic diseases common to trees. Generally, these are going to be things that are in city environments or single trees. Extension forestry handles more of like the huge swaths of forests and things like that. But we just finished up the state fair. We had 5,000 people come to our booth, which was amazing. It was really fun and quite. You just get tons of questions about, oak wilt planting. My neighbor's tree is encroaching on my property. So you have to navigate all these different types of things. And we also have partnership with the bee people, the bee lab, and they have some cool, I think they're solitary nesting bee homes on our nursery, and they're navigating resin and how resin from different trees is found with the bees working. We also work with Master Gardeners, Minneapolis Public Schools. We're starting a new partnership with them, and the Arboretum. We also do tree treks. So if you see those, what are those stakes that are green? They have they're written like, this is a Kentucky coffee tree, and it has facts. That was started by our lab and nursery, and they are constantly updating it as well. And then a bunch of research, which Ryan Murphy, if you don't know him, loves goji berries. Tell him all about goji berries. He'll hate me for that. But that's elm disease too. So that's pretty exciting. We are looking in the process, many of you might know, for a new head of our lab as an assistant professor. So if you know of anybody, let us know. But also just updating you that posting went live a couple weeks ago. Fun. And then, yeah, there's just a couple resources that we've been compiling, kind of a one-stop shop for all of our tree resources. And then the Shade Tree Advisory Committee, we work alongside a lot and do their weekly newsletter. And then that's my info too, if you ever have questions on the programs or, you know, want to talk to somebody else, but you're like, who do I go to? You can point it to me and I'll get you the right way. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sonja. Uh-oh. Now I can't get to my thing. Anyone got it? All right, next is John. Dr. John Zobel, right away.
Well, I'm John Zobel, and I'm an assistant professor in forest biometrics, modeling and measurements in our department. And a little tidbit about me, I'm actually an NRSM grad. I came here for all of my grad work. So it's fun to be on this side of the curtain. It's nice to write the exams now, so it's a lot of fun. I don't inflict that much pain, but it's kind of fun to make some people sweat now, but it's good. All right, so just briefly what my research, I have kind of three main themes of my research that I look at, and I'm just gonna cover those briefly. One area is wildlife habitat and its relationship with forest management. So there's, you know, it's critical if we're going to have done something or proposing to do some sort of management on the forest landscape, what's its implications for wildlife habitat. So back in the early to mid 90s, Minnesota went through what was a generic environmental impact statement. It's a huge deal. One of the deliverables from that was essentially a wildlife habitat model that related wildlife species habitat preferences to common forest inventory variables. It was a really neat breakthrough, and we've updated that since. I worked on it as part of my PhD, and now it's formed into the Wildlife Habitat Indicator for native genera and species, or the WINGS model. And we've used this WINGS model for several projects. I know it's kind of busy, but just a few examples. We look back at the last 40 years of forest management, just the development of forestry in Minnesota the last 40 years, and looked at how wildlife habitat has changed for a bunch of different species. This includes threatened, endangered, and many different groups. Recently, Tyler Gifford, my graduate student, is working with the DNR to evaluate their million cord study. Some of you may have heard of that. Just what can we sustainably harvest on DNR land? Well, this change in management, how is that going to affect wildlife habitats? We're doing a post hoc analysis. You can see that some species do well, some don't, but it's just a tool that we can have to evaluate now anything that's proposed or realized. How's it affecting wildlife habitat? It's been a fruitful area of research for us. Second theme is evaluating the currently available, like growth in yield, site index, sort of different metrics that we use for the commercially important species, forest species in Minnesota. So think aspen and red pine. There's a lot of models out there, a lot of growth in yield. It's been developed over the centuries, really. But we find a lot of that data, a lot of those models are developed on older data, or they have more of a narrow focus. So are the available models actually able to provide what we need now? So we're looking at that. Tyler's looked at some of that. The one example I wanted to reference was Michael Carson, one of my other graduate students, was looking at aspen stocking or aspen carrying capacity. One of the quintessential aspen management guide in the Lake States is Prawl in 1977. And that publication uses a lot of metrics that were developed on data from the 1920s. Well, now, 100 years later, CO2 in our atmosphere has gone up a fair amount. And have these metrics changed? Or are these management guides that are still in use today, are they now outdated? And this graphic, kind of the black lines, you can think of it as carrying capacity for aspen, what a site can, on average, hold. We can see from the colored lines, that's the current data we have available in FIA inventory, shows that indeed it's going up. The stocking can increase on the landscape, calling into question some of these old metrics. So now we're considering what to do next and evaluating these. So that's been a fun project. And then third, very similar is biometric information, growth and yield site indices for those underserved or undermanaged species. So historically we focused on aspen and red pine, but now there's new species that are becoming more important in our management decisions that have been neglected in the past. And so we were seeking to fill those voids. Just an example of this work, shortleaf pine on the Cumberland Plateau down in the southeast. Shortleaf pine is a major commercial species, but on the plateau, it's gone through beetle outbreaks and other things, and it's diminished considerably. And now there's this effort to restore it and manage it. But there's almost no growth and yield information on the plateau. And so we recently used FI data to develop a site index equation for the plateau. So really the goal of this work is just to fill these traditional needs to really applied research to enable the practitioners to manage and do their work. That's it. Did I beat my time? I think.
Great.
Katrine has class, so we can't be done before the last talk arrives. Hannah, next. All right, I think it's good.
Sounds good. Hi, and thanks so much for having me today. My name's Hannah. I'm a PhD candidate in the Forest Resources Department, advised by Dean Current. Today, I wanted to share some preliminary results from my research. I just returned from 8 months of field work in Guatemala between September and May, and wanted to share some of that with you. The general context that was grounded in my research is that tourism's been pitched as a sustainable development strategy for decades now. The problem is that it has very mixed results in practice, usually problems ensuring that those benefits occur at a local level. The jobs and revenue are actually being captured by the host communities. And the COVID-19 pandemic has aggravated and highlighted some of these inequities in the industry more broadly, and the vulnerabilities. So I went in to conduct this research looking at to what extent tourism's been incorporated into gateway community livelihoods, so the communities living immediately adjacent to national parks, and what they did during the pandemic in the absence of tourism. This is the Maya Biosphere Reserve. It's where I do my research in northern Guatemala. It's kind of, if you can see here, sharing the border with Mexico and Belize, the northernmost part of the country of Guatemala. What makes it interesting for this kind of research is because tourism has been managed in very different manners throughout the country, throughout this area, ranging from a more federal control management, a very centralized management of tourism, such as in Tikal National Park, which is the most visited national park in the area. Yaksha is the second most visited park, and what it did most recently is it came to an agreement with local communities that those communities could form an association and offers tourist services to tourists, such as guiding and boat services to tourists who visit the park. Finally, on the most extreme end of community management, we have what's called the community forest concessions. These are areas where communities mobilized in the 90s as this area was becoming a protected area to maintain rights to use the land for timber and non-timber forest production, and then also for timber. So the community of Carmelita then guides tourists through their own concession land to Mirador, which is this green block in the far northeast corner of the park. I conducted 134 surveys with randomly selected households in each of these three communities to compare involvement in tourism. And what we can see in terms of households that responded to working with tourists in the past 12 months, Carmelita, the community model, had the highest participation of working with tourists overall, followed by Yaksha and then Zocotzal. On the other hand, we do see far less involvement in these full-time employment positions in the national park in Carmelita as compared to the communities bordering more federal parks with more federal management of the land. I also asked households what they would do in the event of a hypothetical emergency if they really need cash, for example, an illness. As you can see, there are very diverse responses. Over 14 responses were recorded in total. In Carmelita, they mentioned a little bit more frequently relying on community organizations for support, but overall, the most used strategies across the three communities were asking family or friends for loans, so those personal loans. The stars indicate that households actually used those strategies in the past 12 months at the time of interview. So the takeaways that I'm beginning to see here, and again, this is early data, is that the community management of tourism does seem to be promoting more local levels of participation. However, there's the trade-off that this tends to be dependent on the demand level of tourism, whereas the park jobs tend to be more stable regardless of how many tourists are coming. Also, the responses to the pandemic seem very varied at this point. There's no one clear replacement for tourism in terms of an income strategy, but that depends on the individual household. Thank you.
Megan, you're up next.
All right. Does that look right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meghan Klasic. I am a postdoc working on governance and advocacy, the team on the long-term ecological research program, or the LTER. And so I don't have a lot of pretty pictures because my work is working with documents mostly. So apologies ahead of time. So because I started in a pandemic and I haven't met most of you, I thought I would give you a brief overview of who I am. So I'm from Pennsylvania originally, a very small rural town, thanks. And I did my undergraduate degree in environmental science with a focus on aquatics. At that time, I really wanted to be a natural scientist. And so I did a lot of work in streams. I did some internships, and then when I graduated, got the opportunity to work for the Environmental Protection Agency. And I worked there for about 10 years in drinking water operator certification and capacity development, and then primarily in implementing the Clean Water Act Section 319, or the non-point source pollution control grants program. While I was there, I decided to do a master's degree in environmental planning and management because I was really enjoying sort of the social policy side of things, but I still wanted to maintain this grounding or foundation in natural sciences. Eventually, I decided to throw caution to the wind and get rid of my job and go back to school. And I landed in a geography PhD program at the University of California, Davis, which is very interdisciplinary. And there I was able to sort of marry the natural and social sciences to really focus my research around social ecological systems and looking at the role of environmental risk in shaping policy response. From there, I got a job at the U. So thank you, Kristen. So real quick, just on some of the postdoc work that I'm doing. So my team is led by Kristen Nelson and Forrest Fleischman. And you can see a number of folks that we've been working with at the bottom of this slide. So we're really generally interested in how policies and practices about managing urban nature are developed and how they're changed and how people, whether it's citizens, government officials, interest groups, advocate for that change. And it's all towards this view of trying to get to a place where we can improve the social and environmental outcomes for urban residents across the board. And so related to that, I don't want to bore people with theory, but real quick, we know that advocacy leads to policy change. What we don't know is what makes certain coalitions more or less effective. And so we're really interested in digging more into that. We know that policy change is often very slow, but there are these rapid bursts of change that are catalyzed. So what leads to those catalyzations, and why do certain issues matter at certain times? And again, all of this is in this broader scope of injustice and power and how we get these, how we overcome the unequal distribution of benefits and burdens. And so to that end, I'm working on 2 projects right now. One is a content analysis of municipal ordinances across 31 municipalities in the Twin Cities region. And then the other is doing surveys with residents about lawn management, and specifically around advocacy for non-traditional turf lawns. So around pollinator gardens and pollinator grasses. In the broader context, I thought I'd put a drop for some of the other work that I do because I'm very interested in sort of a broad array of environmental governance issues. So this is largely pulled from my dissertation work. So I do some unconventional oil and gas drilling or fracking to understand how proximity to well pads leads to policy adoption if we have greater wells around municipalities. Secondly, drinking water and climate change. So really understanding how drinking water managers are thinking about climate change impacts to drinking water quality in the future. Long story short, or too long didn't read, they don't think about it. And that's a huge issue, especially in California, where there are huge droughts and floods. And then finally, harmful algal blooms in the Lake Erie region, where I'm really looking at this broad scope, right, where we're involving multiple countries, Métis, First Nations, states, municipalities, to try to understand how people are collaborating and coordinating to overcome this fragmented issue where the problem is originating upstream and the blooms are occurring downstream. And so that, I just guess, as a side note, since a lot of people are bringing up COVID, originally my dissertation was all on harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. And 48 hours before I was supposed to head out to spend 6 months in the Lake Erie region, the state shut down because of COVID. Thus why my dissertation ended up being pretty eclectic. Of course, I wouldn't be a postdoc if I didn't have asks and offers. So my first ask is I'm on the market. I've been here a year, but I need a permanent job. So I'm currently looking at tenure track positions. So if folks see any, here's my email address. I'm interested in things in public policy, environmental studies, political science, geography. I'm also very interested in writing retreats. I have a lot of research and data and analysis that I need to start getting out in publications. So I'd love to work with you on that. And then of course, offers, because I don't want to leave here, just asking for things. I'm definitely open to potential collaborations if any of this seems interesting to you, any of the topics around governance or urban nature justice specifically, but also the other pieces. I'd love to talk to you, and I'm looking for PI or co-PI opportunities. And with that, I will thank you all.
Last but not least, yeah. Oh, and then, there we go. Let's get back to the start. I just made sure all your slides loaded because I knew you weren't going to be here at the start. So next we have Katrine.
I'm Katrine. Hi. I'm an undergrad, a forest and natural resource management student. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself and then the summer research projects that I got to help work on. So I am in the FBMC track. I'm a senior, and so I'll be graduating this year. I was born and raised in Minnesota. I have a picture of my cat on here, me and some waiters at Crosby Farm, and then some projects that I worked on that I took pictures of. Okay, so the first project that I got to help out with was the Forest Geoplot at Itasca State Park. And Forest Geo is a global network that has 74 plus permanent forest research plots. And the PI on the project is Dr. Peter Kennedy, and he's a College of Biological Sciences professor. And he is interested in learning more about vegetation and fungal interactions in the communities there. And the plot is really big, it's 16 hectares. So there's 400 plots or subplots there, so 20 by 20 meters. And I worked with 4 other women and then Dr. Kennedy to tag and paint trees and shrubs with a stem with a diameter of 1 centimeter or greater. So a lot of tagging and painting. Yeah. And then we worked on stem mapping. They hadn't done any stem mapping yet. So the idea is to create a map like you see up here in the right-hand corner that is, shows all the different communities. So all of the different colored dots there are just different tree and shrub species that we mapped. So it's a little bit of the mapping that we did. And then we worked on creating protocols for future interns because it's going to take a long time to map all of that. And here's just some pictures from up there. There's everyone that I worked with, a PhD student of Peter's, Talia Michaud, and then another undergrad, Erica, on my right-hand side. And then we also worked with 2 interns from the White Earth Reservation as well. They were high school students, and that was really cool. And then there's just some different pictures of stuff that I saw up there. I guess it's worth mentioning. So it's a fire-dependent forest community, but it was really turning more into maple and basswood up there. because they haven't used fire in quite a long time. And then there are also some black and great ash swamps. Okay, and then for the rest of the summer, Erica and I worked for Dr. Rebecca Montgomery, and we got to work on a bunch of different projects, which were really cool. We got to go to the Spruce Climate Change Project and the Marcel Experimental Forest, and then help out with one of her postdoc researchers, and then grad students, grad students as well, Anna Yang and Austin. And the main project that we worked on, though, was the oak forest permanent plot and oak wilt monitoring at Cedar Creek, so up in East Bethel. And there, as you can see here on this map, there are 45 randomly assigned plots throughout the Cedar Creek ecosystem reserve there. And we just collected data on the plots, 8-meter fixed radius nested plots. And we figured out what trees, shrubs, and forbs were there, and then looked at oak wilt presence and absence. And then I also worked a little bit for Be Forewarned, a climate change project that I worked on last summer. Be Forewarned is a long-term climate change project at the Cloquet Forestry Center, and then also at the Hubachek Wilderness Research Center. And because I was familiar with that project, I decided to do UROP with them and Dr. Montgomery. And my proposal, because I'm still working on it, I'm not completed yet, or I don't have any results yet, is using spectral reflectance of dry leaf tissue, and then using that to assess the effect of climate change on leaf mass per area, which is a trait that can help us determine plant physiology and ecosystem function. And I am using broadleaves because dried needles are difficult to take spectral measurements of with a leaf clip. 1 boreal species, and then 2 oaks and 2 maples. And I'm using a spectroradiometer. And then my hypotheses are that the plants that were grown in the heated plots with reduced rain will produce a lower LMA opposed to the ambient plots. And then also I believe that the boreal species, paper birch, will have a greater variation in LMA across all of the treatments, just because it's less drought tolerant and doesn't do well with heat. All right, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I didn't put my email on here, but you can look up my name. All right, thanks for listening.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and then we can just see ourselves and online people, right? There we go. And first off, just thank everyone for being willing to do this. And wow, super cool. What an amazing diversity and mix of different things that we're working on in this forest resources community. And I loved hearing also across kind of the spectrum of different career stages. And I hope people here and joining online enjoyed that as well. With that, I guess I would open the floor to questions. And folks online, feel free to type into the chat your questions, or unmute actually, because we can see you on the big screen, except none of you have your videos on. But so any questions for any of the speakers or comments, or it was so much.
I have a question for Megan. With the phosphorus work and the harmful algal work, because a lot of the work I'm doing over like rebate relates to phosphorus too. And so between upstream and downstream, and I also wonder about the like phosphorus piece of it. So between any actions that could or could not be taken now versus it's taken decades for that phosphorus to get there. Did that factor into any of your work or thinking or study?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of like disagreement over the quote unquote cause of algal blooms in northern regions. You know, everyone marginalizes agriculture. But legacy has been an issue just in the past like 3 or 4 years. They predict fewer blooms, but with in the lake bed itself that are big populations. But yeah, so it definitely plays a part. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting because there's so many funding programs going into helping farmers basically for the best management practices, but they're still in like these areas that are research maybe identified 5-10 years ago as big issue areas. So they're still not doing sort of the forethought of, hey, where are the new issues in the future? That like towards the end of the research, I started to get interested in like climate change is going to shift where agriculture is happening, and it already is happening in some cases. So how is that going to change where these practices should be putting it right? But they're focusing all the funding to some places that are the immediate issues, which I think is fair to say we see that across the board for implementing policy, like environmental policy. They're very reactive.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, it's something I think about a lot too. It's like, okay, so not only we need to think about the now, the past, and the future all at the same time.
And how
right. Yeah.
Question?
Yeah. I am Sonja. I was wondering, so I was doing environmental education for school, and so I feel like, one, I'm disappointed that I haven't already, but I'm wondering where in the realm of like education, in terms of like the extension services that are offered, and also like the master sort of programs that are offered, where the program falls in, and then if there's an overlap for collaboration.
Yeah, great question. Full transparency, I'm not 100% sure on the history of extension, because we used to be, our acronym used to be UFORE, which included extension at the end, and then we lost it, and Gary was their previous person that had like a part-time employment, and then there was so we're not officially part of extension. I'm looking to collaborate a lot more with them, and have been working with especially the department or the extension and forestry team. So definitely looking to collaborate more and build that up, because we do a lot of outreach. There are a lot of people like, wait, you're not extension, but what you do, CCA is all about like outreach, and it's a like a master gardeners, but not extension. So you're not alone in being confused. I think a lot of people are like, what? It is a unique program, and how a lot of it has to do with how it was formed in the 90s, funding and weird stuff. So yeah, if you want to collaborate, let me know. And I'm trying to get on track. We're getting a new volunteer database system, which is really exciting. That's on track with some other parts of the university, and hopefully that'll make it easier for cross collaboration. Yeah, we're looking to really make some big significant changes, but as everybody knows, those take a little bit of time. But yeah, it's exciting. That's an idea. Yeah.
Angie, do you want to share something? I saw you unmuted your video.
Yeah, if I can, that you can hear me okay?
You're not in the room, but can people hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, they can hear you.
Okay, great. I can be pretty loud. So it was a great question. I think I got it about extension. And I just want to like be very clear that there is no urban forestry capacity with an extension at this point. So Gary Johnson had an extension appointment, but when he departed, that was not, his extension appointment was not renewed. And so institutionally, extension has no urban forestry and community forestry capacity at all, which I think is a gigantic injustice. And we would love it if you could advocate for more of that. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Other questions, comments, anything, discussion from the floor?
I was just so happy to hear about what all you folks are doing. You know, I just know there's incredible richness and wealth
all that knowledge that we have. We do this out, we don't do it in. And so suggested this, and maybe we'll continue other lightning talks throughout the semester would be great. My question is, could you just define FIA as a data set in case other people don't know about it, because it's kind of known as one thing. And I want to let you know that Minnesota is beginning an EROC, which is, and CVENS is a big part of it, which is about creating data sets for researchers across, in a variety of ways. And so FIA is a federal one.
Yes, so it's the Forest Inventory Analysis. It's the USDA, the Forest Service one. There are 1,000-ish plots in Minnesota, and they measure 20% of those every year. So every 5 years, you have really pretty high density on the ground research grade inventory data. That's pretty much what we live on. Most of my career is built on that data. So it's publicly available, it's free, it's a really great data. That's great to hear though about the EROC.
What does EROC stand
Well,
for?
it is a concept, in my opinion, remember, I'm a social scientist, right? It is a concept of that the president and others want to do in such a way that they start gathering data across the state in a lab, such so that LTR or any of you need data sets similarly, but it's what they're talking water, vegetation, climate. So these interrelated, and I'm going to say similarly cared for, so that they are all, I don't know if you've ever tried to put two data sets together that are gathered differently, and it's kind of like a mash. So, and I would love to hear, people's opinion about it, to hear more about it. And we start thinking about that. Is that something that we should be doing? So we have place-based things called the rocks where we do research. This is an idea. There's this data set.
Is it just through the university, or is it like MPCA with the DNR with the university with St.
It's
Catherine?
a collab. Oh, that's too broad.
Too broad.
Okay, I don't know. I'm going to say at this point, remember, I'm just hearing, they've been working on it for a while, but it's more of an idea, I would say, but there's some initial work. It is, Minnesota, DNR, Minnesota in general, and the state. It's CFANS, and it is. There's one other entity. Does anybody know who it is? It had enough to have acronym. So GEM. Does anybody know?
Oh, what's GEM? I've heard of it, but
anyway,
I can't.
geographic. So this is like one of those little teaser prequels in terms of people doing their research long term, if it exists.
Thanks, Kristen. So for those wondering, the idea is to do lightning talks as the first seminar of each semester. And this was a pilot. We did 6. I actually think we have time to do more than 6, maybe 1 more, maybe 2 more. We still have 10, 12 minutes left in our hour time. So it went smoothly. That was our worry. We were like, oh, if there's big gaps between, or if there's any, hiccups between speakers, that we might have it build in extra time. But I think we could probably have a couple more and hear from more members of the community. So not to cut off questions or anything, but to answer your question about let's do more of this. I think the idea is the first of each semester will be lightning talks by members of the FR community. Any other questions or comments?
I think we should definitely record them. Or for the future.
We recorded this one. We're still recording as I stand up here.
That's right, I did.
Well, if there are no further questions or discussion, I just thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to all the speakers for being willing to give short vignettes of your work, and we'll see you in 2 weeks quote, not here though. We're going to be in 302 Coffert, so next door to Silver and Green Hall for the rest of the semester.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and even the alternative to 26.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, we had some finding rooms issues. So anyway, yeah, we'll be in 302, same time, 2 weeks from now. And then again, the second Tuesday of October, second Tuesday of November, and second Tuesday of December. And that last one is going to be interesting. I think it's going to be improv with people from the community contributing a slide, and someone has to give a talk based on a whole bunch of slides that come in.
It's the department, right? It has to give the talk.
She has made up a lot of things. No problem with that. But if it's all right with you, I hope we can put it up on the website and have the FR seminar series, and so just keep that going.
All right, thanks to our online folks who were here.
And Rebecca for actually getting everyone's slides and lining them all up. Adding the lightning format.